Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
The morning we sent out the wedding invites, Maya asked me one more time if I was sure about leaving the return address off the envelope that would have gone to my parents. I didn't even look up from my coffee when I said, I've never been more sure about anything. The silence that followed didn't need words. She knew. I knew. And deep down, if they were honest with themselves, they probably knew too. My parents were the kind of people who always believed the story they told themselves, no matter how far it was from the truth. And the truth was this: they hadn't just let me down once. They had watched me drown, handed me a teacup to bail myself out, and then took my brother on a Caribbean cruise. It didn't always feel this obvious. Growing up in Lincoln, Nebraska, we looked like the perfect family in photos: Dad in his flannel, Mom in her holiday sweaters, Josh with that never-fading grin, and me, always kind of off to the side, like I'd wandered into someone else's picture. My little brother Josh was the golden one from day one. I don't even blame him for it, not entirely. When you're handed the keys to the kingdom at 16 in the form of a brand new SUV, you don't stop to ask why your older brother is still biking home from a job at the grocery store in the snow. I started working when I was 14, sweeping floors at a local hardware store, then stocking shelves at night after school. By 17, I was waking up at 5 to deliver newspapers before class, then running off to my second job after football practice. It wasn't because we were poor, we weren't. Dad was an electrical contractor with his own company, and Mom ran the books. We lived in a 4-bedroom colonial with a 2-car garage and a finished basement. It was never about survival. It was about expectations. I was the responsible one, the one who knew how to take care of himself. And because I could, I was expected to. Meanwhile, Josh was always one minor inconvenience away from a family intervention and a gift card. It's strange how favoritism creeps in so quietly that you start to think you imagined it. You're told it's all in your head, that they love you just the same. But loving someone and showing up for them aren't the same thing, and somewhere between my first ER visit and my final semester of college, that difference started to burn a hole in my chest. I was 22 when the migraine started. Then came the numbness in my hands, the vertigo, the blinding pain that would leave me curled up on the bathroom floor for hours. After nearly a year of bouncing between clinics and specialists, they finally gave it a name: multiple sclerosis. It came with a tidy diagnosis and a lifelong treatment plan that cost more than my annual rent. I remember sitting in my beat-up Corolla in the hospital parking lot, gripping the steering wheel like it would hold me together. The first big prescription ran $1,200 a month, and that was with insurance. My jaw actually went slack when I saw the pharmacy slip. I called my parents that same night, still a little woozy from the muscle relaxants, and told them everything. My voice cracked halfway through, not from pain but from something worse, hope. I really thought they'd step in, that they'd say something like, "We'll figure this out together," or "Don't worry about the money, son, we've got you." But what I got was silence. Then my dad cleared his throat and said, "Well, you've always been strong, Nate. You'll get through this." Then Mom added something about prayer and positive thinking and how stress can make symptoms worse. They asked if I needed anything, but it wasn't the kind of offer you take seriously. It was the kind you give to someone at a funeral when you don't know what else to say. "Let us know if there's anything we can do. But you both know they won't answer the phone if you call." That winter, I rationed meds. I didn't tell them that. I didn't tell anyone, not even Josh, who was busy posting pictures from Cancun with his college buddies. He looked good, tanned, holding a drink in one hand and a girl in the other. He called me a few times, actually, mostly when he needed help with his resume or wanted advice on a job interview. I always answered. I didn't want to be the bitter brother. But every time I opened another hospital bill, it got harder not to be. There was one night, maybe 8 months after the diagnosis, when I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by envelopes. I'd open every single one like they might magically say something different this time. They didn't. Each one added a new digit to the total I owed, a number I couldn't wrap my brain around anymore. I stared at the ceiling and thought, maybe I'll just stop treatment altogether. Maybe I'll let the disease take the wheel and see how far I get. And then I thought of my parents again. Not with hatred, with confusion. How do you choose silence when your child is sinking? How do you fly first class while your son is eating ramen with Advil for dessert? That night, I picked up the phone again. Not to Josh this time. To them. My hands were shaking when I dialed. My voice wasn't angry, it was quiet, exhausted. I told them the balance I was staring at. I told them how much the next medication would cost. I didn't ask for a handout. I just wanted to feel like I wasn't carrying it alone. There was a pause. Then my dad sighed and said, "Well, Nate, do what you gotta do." And that's when the first crack really formed. Not just in my relationship with them, but in me. The next morning, I woke up and realized I didn't just feel sick. I felt disposable. And that's the moment I started rewriting the story they thought we were all living in. Because the truth? This was never just about money. It was about who shows up when it counts and who sends a postcard from Bali instead. After that call, things didn't change, they just got quieter. My parents didn't follow up, didn't ask for updates, didn't send a card or a check, or even one of those thinking of you texts people send when they don't know what else to say. I think in their minds, the conversation had ended when Dad muttered that line, "Do what you gotta do, son," as if I had just told him I needed new tires, not that I was drowning in medical debt and contemplating skipping treatment to stay afloat. Maybe they thought I was exaggerating, or maybe they just didn't want to look too closely because if they did, they'd have to admit they weren't the kind of parents they always believed themselves to be. Whatever the reason, they disappeared into their comfort while I descended further into survival mode. Meanwhile, Josh was in Greece with his new girlfriend, a girl named Lexi who called herself a wellness influencer and had a perfectly curated Instagram feed full of sunset yoga poses and lavender spritzers. Every day brought a new post: Santorini beaches, rooftop dinners, selfies with donkeys on cobbled hills. It wasn't just salt in the wound. It was a whole damn ocean. Josh had tagged our parents in one photo with the caption, "Couldn't have done it without y'all. Love you." And sure enough, Mom had commented with a row of heart emojis and something about how proud they were of him. I stared at that post for a full 5 minutes, just letting the rage settle in my stomach like wet cement. So I did what I'd always done. I picked up extra shifts at the bookstore, then started tutoring kids in math on the side. I cut my grocery bill in half and let go of the idea of ever taking a vacation or buying anything with a warranty. I called my insurance company so many times I had their hold music memorized, and I learned how to speak in a tone that was desperate but still polite, because I knew the second you raised your voice they had a script ready to shut you down. Every day became a math problem, a strategy session, a game of medical roulette where I had to choose which symptoms I could afford to treat this week. My friends noticed I was losing weight. Maya, back when we were still just friends, started bringing me lunch now and then. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches and fruit she packed in Tupperware like it was no big deal. She never asked why I wasn't eating much. I think she already knew. She had that quiet way of seeing people without making them feel seen. Eventually, I told her everything. Not just about the illness, but about the way my parents had handled it or refused to. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she said, "You know they failed you, right?" That wasn't okay. It was the first time someone had said it out loud. The thing is, they didn't hit me. They didn't scream or call me names. There were no big scenes or slamming doors or dramatic ultimatums. What they did was more insidious. They minimized. They ignored. They praised me for being strong while they poured all their attention into my brother's highlight reel. And if I dared bring up the imbalance, I was being sensitive or selfish or too focused on the past. Ever felt like your family only loved you when it was convenient for them? When you fit neatly into the role they assigned you, quiet, capable, self-sufficient, so they didn't have to get their hands dirty. Because I've been that guy. I played the part so well, Even I started to believe it. Until the pain got too loud to ignore, and suddenly I wasn't strong, I was needy. And the people who were supposed to catch me just stepped back and let me fall. I remember sitting at Maya's kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of bills and paperwork, and telling her I felt like a burden. She didn't argue or give me a pep talk. She just slid a cup of tea in front of me and said, "You're not a burden. You've been carrying other people's weight for so long, you forgot how heavy your own has become." Meanwhile, life marched on for Josh. One weekend he FaceTimed me from Mykonos, clearly drunk, talking about how he and Lexi were thinking of getting matching tattoos. He asked how things were going, and I told him I was managing. I didn't mention that I was skipping another month of physical therapy because I couldn't swing the copay. He told me to hang in there, man, like he was the one offering emotional support. That was the thing with Josh, he had no clue what it meant to struggle, because someone had always been there to clean up after him. Until one night, when it finally caught up with him. I got a call from him at 3 in the morning. His voice was shaky, panicked, the way it gets when someone knows they've crossed a line but doesn't want to admit it. He'd been pulled over for a DUI outside of LA, blew a number so high it surprised even the officer. He begged me not to tell Mom and Dad, but when I asked what he was going to do, he laughed nervously and said, "Don't worry. Dad's already wiring money to the lawyer." That's when the pieces finally locked into place. Because when I needed a couple $100 just to get my prescriptions filled, I got a shrug and a hollow pep talk. But when Josh got behind the wheel drunk and endangered people's lives, he got a high-priced attorney and a pat on the back. I didn't sleep that night. And, for the first time, I started to feel something that scared me more than the disease ever had. I started to feel done. There's something humiliating about sitting at a pharmacy counter with a white bag in your hand, pretending not to feel the weight of the decision you're about to make. I used to think choosing between rent and groceries was as low as it got, but that was before I had to choose between walking without pain and keeping my lights on. The pharmacist gave me that look again, the one she tried to hide, the one that said she'd seen people like me before, people who ask for only part of a prescription because they can't afford the whole thing. I gave her my usual lie, something about traveling and only needing a week's worth. She smiled and nodded like she believed me, but we both knew the truth. I was rationing again. By that point, I had it down to a system: take the meds on days when I had to be on my feet, skip them on weekends, avoid going out, and keep a heating pad running like a roommate. I didn't tell Maya how bad it had gotten, mostly because I was tired of hearing my own voice say the same things over and over. I felt like a broken record of "I'm fine" and "it's not that bad," when really I was watching my body betray me one missed dose at a time. Every skipped pill meant another inch of numbness, another spasm in my legs, another night where I'd wake up drenched in sweat and wondering how long I could keep pretending this was sustainable. Then one afternoon, Maya walked in with her laptop open and said, "Did you know your brother just launched a drone company?" I thought she was joking. But sure enough, there was Josh on LinkedIn, smiling in front of a beach somewhere, announcing his new startup, some kind of aerial video production company for weddings and real estate agents. The post was slick, all buzzwords and blue sky optimism, and at the bottom, he'd written, "Thanks to Mom and Dad for believing in me from day one." I stared at that sentence like it was written in a foreign language. I actually blinked a few times, like maybe I'd read it wrong. But no, there it was: gratitude. Public, glowing, nauseating gratitude. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I just sat on the couch in the dark and tried to figure out what it would take for me to be seen. Not pitted. Not applauded for my strength. Just seen. I thought about calling them, but I already knew how the conversation would go. They'd say they helped both their sons in different ways. They'd tell me Josh needed a push, or had potential, or whatever excuse made them feel less like they'd picked a favorite and more like they were just doing their best. And if I pushed back, if I dared mention the 5 figures of medical debt, or the skip treatments, or the fact that I'd lost 10 pounds in 2 months because I couldn't afford fresh produce, I'd get the same line I'd always gotten: "Don't be so negative. Nate. Life's hard for everyone. That line came back to haunt me at Thanksgiving, which we still did out of habit, though it felt more like theater every year. We were at their house, the same one I grew up in, the one with the beige carpet and the framed Bible verse in the hallway. Josh had flown in with Lexi, who now had a podcast, a juice cleanse program, and a partnership with some kind of collagen supplement company. She showed up wearing linen like she lived in California, even though it was 30 degrees outside. They brought a bottle of wine with a label I couldn't pronounce, and within 10 minutes of walking through the door, Mom had already posted a picture of them to Facebook. Dinner was strained, even before the wine kicked in. I could feel the familiar tug in my spine, the early signs of a flare-up I'd been trying to ignore. Every time I shifted in my seat, my muscles screamed. I asked if we could keep the thermostat up a few degrees, and Mom smiled and said, "Just put on a sweater, honey." Josh dominated the conversation with stories about drone footage, about a wedding he filmed in Big Sur and a real estate agent who offered him a Tesla test drive in exchange for a demo reel. Dad beamed through the whole thing like he was listening to his own reflection. At some point, between the cranberry sauce and the mashed potatoes, I cracked. I don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe it was the way Josh casually mentioned his business grant, which, let's be honest, was a family loan with no strings attached. Maybe it was the fact that I had to excuse myself to take painkillers with tap water in the bathroom because I didn't want to make a scene. Either way, I came back to the table and said, "It's funny how some of us get startup money and others get silence when they ask for help with medical bills." The air shifted instantly. Josh went quiet. Maya stopped mid-chew. Dad put down his fork and looked at me like I'd kicked the family dog. Then he said it calm, condescending, cutting. "Don't bring that negative energy to the table, Nate. Negative energy. Not, 'I'm sorry.' Not, 'Let's talk about this.' Just a command to shut up and stay in my lane." I looked at Mom, waiting for her to say something, anything, but she just stared at her plate. Like maybe if she didn't move, the whole thing would go away. That night, I barely spoke in the car. Maya didn't push. She just put her hand on my leg while I clenched my jaw so tight it ached. I kept thinking I tried. I showed up. I gave them one more chance. And what did I get in return? A lecture about tone. 2 weeks later, I had a full-blown relapse. I woke up with my right arm completely numb and a crushing fatigue that made even blinking feel like work. Maya called the doctor, then the ambulance, and within hours I was hooked up to N4, wondering if I'd ever feel my fingers again. She held my hand while they ran tests, while the beeping machines counted out the hours I'd be there. She took my phone when it buzzed and read the message out loud. "Hope you feel better soon. We're on a cruise, talk when we're back. Love, Mom and Dad." That was the moment I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. The first time I met Maya, I was sitting in the waiting room of a physical therapy center, trying to look like I wasn't clenching my teeth through a wave of nerve pain shooting down my back. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and every movement felt like it echoed in my spine. She walked in with that kind of presence that doesn't announce itself loudly, but somehow shifts the air around it anyway. She was carrying a tote bag full of textbooks and a half-drunk coffee, muttering something under her breath about traffic, and for a moment, I remember thinking, she doesn't look like she belongs here either. We sat near each other 2 or 3 times before either of us spoke, and even then, it was casual, small talk about the vending machine being broken, about the outdated magazines in the lobby, about the smell of the disinfectant. But there was something in her eyes when she looked at me, something steady and unflinching that I wasn't used to. Like she saw I was hurting and didn't pity me for it. We ended up walking out together after our 3rd session. She offered me a ride without hesitation, and even though my pride wanted to say no, my legs were screaming otherwise, so I got in her car and let myself accept help from someone who didn't make me feel ashamed for needing it. I didn't tell her much at first. I'd gotten good at keeping things vague. I said I had some nerve issues, some fatigue. I didn't tell her about the full diagnosis or the financial mess, or the cavern of silence between me and my parents. I was tired of explaining myself to people who couldn't hear me anyway. But Maya wasn't like most people. She noticed things. She noticed when I winced getting into the car. She noticed how I always double-checked prices at the grocery store. She noticed that I wore the same 3 sweaters on rotation, even when it was cold. Eventually, I told her about the MS, about the meds, about the hospital visits and the job I had to quit because I couldn't keep standing for 8 hours. I expected her to flinch or frown or say something useless like, "That must be hard," but instead, she asked what kind of support system I had. And when I hesitated, when I shrugged and said, "My parents think I'm overreacting," she looked me dead in the eye and said, "They abandoned you." Just like that. No preamble. No sugarcoating. No attempt to make excuses for people she'd never met. That one sentence hit harder than any pill I'd taken in months. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to say it out loud until she did. It was Maya who nudged me toward therapy. She didn't push, just left a card on the table one morning with a note that said, "You deserve to talk to someone who listens." So I went. Once, then twice. And before long, I was sitting in a chair every Thursday afternoon, peeling back layers I hadn't touched in years. I started to see how deep the cuts went, not just the obvious wounds of unpaid bills and empty promises, but the quieter damage of growing up feeling like you had to be invisible to be acceptable. I remembered being 7 years old and getting a perfect report card, only to have Mom smile and say, "That's just what we expect from you, honey." I remembered watching Josh get cheered on for the bare minimum while I got told I was mature for my age, as if being self-sufficient at 10 was a compliment and not a survival mechanism. My therapist said something that stuck with me: love without presence isn't love. It's branding. I laughed when she said it because it sounded like something a consultant would say at a corporate retreat, but the truth of it burned. My parents loved me in theory. They loved the idea of having a responsible, low-maintenance son. But when that son needed them for real, when the cracks started to show, they didn't step in, they stepped away. And every time I gave them another chance to show up, they handed it back with silence. My birthday came around while I was deep in one of those therapy phases where everything feels raw and overexposed. I hadn't said anything to Maya about it, mostly because I didn't want to fuss. She found out anyway, because of course she did, and she brought over takeout from my favorite Thai place and a little cupcake with a crooked candle. We ate on the couch, legs tangled under a blanket, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to pretend I was okay. I just was. My phone stayed silent all day. No call. No text. Not even a social media happy birthday from Mom or Dad. Nothing from Josh. Not a single word. That kind of silence doesn't scream, it just settles over you like fog, and you try to pretend it's not suffocating. You tell yourself maybe they forgot. Maybe they were busy. Maybe. But deep down, you know better. Because it's not about forgetting. It's about what people make time for. And they hadn't made time for me in years. A week later, Maya got a promotion. Big one. Regional position. Same company, more money, more opportunity, and a transfer offer to Minneapolis. She told me about it over dinner, casual like she wasn't sure what I'd say. And I didn't hesitate. I told her we should go. That maybe a fresh start was exactly what we needed. That maybe it was time to stop trying to fix what was never whole to begin with. We both knew what leaving meant. It meant distance from my parents. From Josh. From the town that watched me shrink myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be. It meant starting over in a place where no one expected me to pretend. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like running away. It felt like choosing myself. When I asked Maya to marry me, it was a quiet moment, no fireworks or flash mobs or drone-filmed proposals in scenic vineyards. It was just us on the couch after dinner, my hands still smelling faintly of garlic from the pasta we cooked, and her hair up in one of those messy buns she always wore when she was tired but content. I didn't even have a ring yet. I just looked at her and said, I don't want to do the rest of this life without you, and she didn't cry, she didn't squeal, she just smiled like she'd known it was coming and whispered, okay. I think we both knew that kind of promise didn't need a spotlight to make it real. The next few days passed in that soft haze you get when something major shifts in your life. We talked about venues, small ones, simple ones. Maya wanted flowers from a local farm, and I wanted music that didn't sound like it came from a stock wedding playlist. We talked about guest lists over coffee, over takeout, over grocery runs. Names got scribbled down on napkins and backs of receipts, friends who'd stuck around, coworkers who'd turned into real family, a handful of cousins I still talk to. Her side was full of warmth, parents who called just to say they were proud, a sister who was already offering to help with decorations, a grandmother who sent her engagement cookies by mail. My side? Not so full. The elephant in the room, of course, was Mom and Dad. I kept putting it off. The call, the conversation, the inevitable question of whether they'd be invited to watch me marry the woman who helped rebuild the parts of me they'd ignored for so long. I told myself I'd bring it up after we settled on a date, or once we finalized the location, or maybe after I had a ring on her finger, some arbitrary milestone that would delay the confrontation I wasn't ready for. Because I already knew the truth. I didn't want them there. I couldn't picture their faces in the crowd without also picturing every moment they weren't there when it counted. But families are persistent, even the silent ones. It was 2 weeks after we posted our quiet announcement online, just a simple photo of us in the kitchen, smiling with mugs in our hands, no hashtags, no dramatic captions when my phone rang. It was my parents' home number. I let it go to voicemail, not ready to hear whatever version of reality they were going to sell me this time. Later, I listened to the message while sitting on the floor folding laundry. It was Mom's voice, chipper and breezy like we spoke all the time. Just wanted to say congrats. We saw the post. How exciting, Josh told us. Lexi's thrilled too. She might do a video about wedding skincare tips. Can you imagine? She chuckled, then added, anyway, let us know how we can help. We'd love to be part of the big day. There was no question. Just an assumption. Of course they'd be invited. Of course they'd be part of it. Because in their minds, nothing had really changed. Maya came home to find me sitting on the floor, holding a towel I hadn't folded, just staring at the phone like it might start screaming. I told her what the message said. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't say, I told you so. She just sat down next to me, took the towel, and said, you're not a bad person for not inviting them. It wasn't permission. It wasn't advice. It was a lifeline. Because for weeks, I'd been wrestling with this guilt I couldn't quite explain. The kind that comes when you stop pretending the people who hurt you deserve access to your milestones just because they share your blood. The kind that says you're obligated to forgive, even if they never asked. The kind that whispers, you'll regret it if you don't include them, even though part of you knows what you'll really regret is handing them another front row seat to a life they never showed up for behind the scenes. We drafted the guest list that night, not out loud, just sitting in silence on the couch while we passed the laptop back and forth. Her mom, her dad, her sister, my college roommate, her boss, a couple of close neighbors, my old bandmate from high school. My parents' names never made it to the screen. I don't know if they noticed right away. Maybe they assumed the invite was in the mail. Maybe they figured it had been lost, or delayed, or sent to the wrong address. Or maybe, deep down, they knew. Because silence has a weight to it, and ours had been growing heavier with each passing year. The last time they visited me in person was over 2 years ago. The last time they offered real help? I couldn't even remember. And the last time they asked me how I was truly asked, without rerouting the conversation back to Josh or some neighborhood gossip, I was still taking community college classes and hadn't yet learned how to swallow resentment without choking on it. Then, the voicemail came. This time, it was Dad's voice. Short, stiff. So, no invitation? Just 3 words. But they carried the full weight of everything unspoken. It didn't sound like a question. It sounded like an accusation. I knew something was off the second I saw his car parked outside my apartment. The same glossy black SUV my parents had helped him lease 2 years ago to look more professional. It was spotless as ever, sun glinting off the windshield like it belonged in a dealership commercial, not in front of the place where I lived and budgeted utilities down to the last cent. I stood in the kitchen with the coffee pot still in my hand, watching him through the blinds like I was witnessing some strange weather event I hadn't expected. Maya wasn't home, thank God. I didn't want her caught in whatever was about to unfold, because even though I hadn't talked to Josh in months, I could feel the tension vibrating in my bones the moment he got out of the car and walked up to my door like we were just two brothers catching up and not two men living on different planets. He knocked once, light, polite, rehearsed, and I opened the door without a word. He didn't wait for an invitation before stepping inside, sunglasses still on, holding a cardboard tray with 2 iced coffees and a hopeful grin that made my stomach twist. "Thought you might want one," he said, holding out the drink like it was a peace offering, like cold brew could mend years of buried resentment and gut-wrenching silence. I took it mostly because I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a dramatic rejection. He sat on the edge of the couch like someone trying to remember how to act normal at a funeral. So he started, drawing the word out like he was easing into a hot bath. "Mom and Dad are kind of wrecked, man. They've been calling me nonstop about this wedding thing. I just thought, I don't know, I'd drive down, talk it out, see if maybe we could figure something out before it gets worse. Before it gets worse." As if we were on equal footing. As if they were confused victims in a misunderstanding, instead of architects of years of neglect wrapped in polite smiles and passive-aggressive Christmas cards. I didn't say anything at first. I let him keep talking because I wanted to see how long it would take before he made it about himself. Spoiler, not long. "They just feel kind of blindsided," he said, finally taking off his sunglasses and placing them on the coffee table like we were settling in for a serious therapy session. "I mean, yeah, they've made mistakes, but come on, no invite at all? That's pretty cold, dude." That's when I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I had finally reached that brittle edge of exhaustion where the only thing left to do is laugh or start screaming. "Cold," I repeated, setting the coffee down untouched. "You want to talk about cold, Josh?" He didn't respond right away, just gave me that look he always gave me whenever things got uncomfortable, that mix of pity and confusion like he was watching someone unravel and couldn't figure out why. "I just think maybe they don't know what they did," he said, like maybe they didn't realize how all this stuff felt to you. "You've always been, kind of serious. Like, hard to read." And there it was. The line. The one that had haunted every awkward family dinner, every ignored birthday, every "he can take care of himself" dismissal I'd ever swallowed. I stood up before I even realized I was doing it, hands clenched at my sides, voice shaking not with anger, but with sheer weight, the pressure of holding everything in for too long. "You've always been the favorite, Josh. Always. And instead of asking yourself why that might be, or whether you maybe benefited from it, you just coasted along like the golden child while I racked up hospital debt and begged insurance companies for another month of coverage." He raised his hands slightly, defensive, almost offended. "Whoa, man. I didn't know any of that. You never said anything. You should have just asked for help." My jaw dropped, not because of what he said, because of how completely, utterly sincere he looked saying it. "Asked for help." I repeated. "Are you serious?" I did ask for help. I called them from a hospital parking lot and told them I couldn't afford my medication. You know what Dad said? "Do what you gotta do, son." He looked genuinely baffled, like that story didn't compute, like maybe he thought I was exaggerating or remembering it wrong. And that was the moment something inside me shifted. Not snapped, just tilted. I realized I wasn't going to get through to him. Not really. He didn't live in the same world I did. He never had. His problems were solvable, his mistakes were forgivable, and his life came with a cushion so soft he'd never once had to feel the concrete beneath it. I'm not doing this with you, I said, my voice calm now, almost too calm. You don't get to parachute in with a coffee and pretend this is just a communication issue. You lived your whole life with them bending over backward to make sure you never felt a moment of real pressure. I lived mine being told I was strong so they didn't have to show up. That's not miscommunication. That's a choice. Josh didn't argue. He stood slowly, picked up his untouched coffee, and looked around the apartment like he was trying to memorize it, like he knew he probably wouldn't be invited back. I just thought maybe we could fix it, he said quietly. Before it's too late. I didn't say what I was thinking, that it had been too late for a long, long time. Instead, I walked him to the door. He hesitated once, like he was waiting for a last-minute pardon, then nodded and left without another word. I stood there long after he'd driven off, staring at the space where his car had been. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. Because they were never going to understand. And maybe that was okay. It was a Sunday in early spring, one of those weird in-between days where the weather can't decide if it wants to be chilly or warm, and the trees still look naked, but the sun hits them like it's trying to convince them something better is coming. Maya's parents had driven down to help us assemble centerpieces for the wedding, the kind that looked rustic and effortless, but actually took an entire afternoon of patience, glue guns, and a shared playlist of classic rock and soft Motown to pull off. I'd met them before, of course. We'd spent holidays together, done dinners, exchanged gifts, but this was the first time I really noticed how much different their presence felt in a room. Her dad, Harold, walked in with a tray of iced tea and a half-eaten cinnamon roll in his hand, talking with crumbs in his beard and laughing like he didn't care who was listening. Her mom, Lorna, had brought a binder full of sticky notes, fabric swatches, and printouts of Pinterest ideas she'd marked up in pen. They moved around the apartment like they lived there, comfortable and familiar, the kind of people who ask what needs doing and just start doing it. At one point, Lorna pulled Maya into a tight hug while they were deciding between ivory and cream napkins, and I just stood there for a second too long, holding a piece of twine in my hand like it might somehow explain the lump that had suddenly lodged itself in my throat. I wasn't jealous, exactly. Or maybe I was, but not in the bitter way people usually mean it. It was more like watching a version of life you'd never known existed, one where parents didn't hover like supervisors or disappear when things got hard, but simply showed up. No drama, no scorekeeping, just presence. Real, unfiltered, unconditional presence. Later that night, after the centerpieces were boxed up and the apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon, glue, and eucalyptus, Maya and I sat on the floor, backs against the couch, plates of leftover Chinese food balanced on our knees. She looked tired, but content, hair falling out of her bun in soft wisps, eyes half closed from a long day of people and projects. I was quiet, too quiet, and she noticed right away. Maya had this terrifying ability to see past every mask I thought I'd mastered. "You okay?" she asked, nudging me lightly with her foot. I tried to play it off, poked at my food with a plastic fork, and said something dumb about being tired. But she didn't let it go. She just waited, silent, patient, in that way that makes you tell the truth because silence feels heavier than the words you're about to say. "I keep thinking about how her mom hugged her," I said finally, not looking up. Like it was just automatic. No hesitation. No drama. Maya stayed quiet, but her hand found mine under the blanket. "And I know it sounds pathetic," I continued, feeling the words catch in my chest, "but it's been so long since someone held me like that, and just meant it." I don't know why it broke me open in that moment. Maybe it was the smell of her mom's perfume still lingering on the throw pillows, or maybe it was the fact that they'd walked out the door without asking for anything in return. But something cracked. "Maybe I should have invited them," I said suddenly, the words spilling out too fast, too raw. "I mean, they're still my parents." Maya didn't flinch. She didn't sigh or shift away or try to fix it. She just squeezed my hand and said, softly but firmly, "Are they family, Nate?" Or are they just relatives? That question hung in the room like smoke, thick, impossible to ignore. I hated how much I didn't have an answer, because I wanted to believe blood meant something. I wanted to believe that deep down, beneath all the forgetting and favoritism and paper-thin apologies, there was still some unbreakable bond. But the truth was harder to swallow. The truth was, family isn't defined by genetics or shared holiday photos. Family shows up. Family calls on your birthday. Family doesn't let you skip medication while they fund drone companies. I didn't respond. I just sat there, staring into the bottom of my empty takeout box like it held some kind of clarity I hadn't earned yet. The next morning, I opened the mailbox expecting the usual bills and circulars, but what I found stopped me cold: a cream-colored envelope, slightly wrinkled, with my name written in my mother's handwriting. No return address, just our last name in soft cursive on the back flap. My first instinct was to tear it open right there in the lobby, but something made me tuck it into my jacket pocket instead, like it was too fragile to handle standing up. Back in the apartment, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before touching it again. Maya was still asleep, the early morning light creeping through the blinds, casting long shadows across the linoleum. I held the letter in my hands like it was a bird I didn't want to startle. I didn't open it. Not yet. Because the silence had already said so much, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what words might try to take back. The letter sat on the table for 2 days before I opened it, tucked between a stack of wedding RSVPs and a dog-eared magazine I kept forgetting to recycle. Every time I walked by, I glanced at it, half expecting it to evaporate or reveal some secret meaning just through its quiet presence. It didn't. It just sat there weightless and heavy all at once. When I finally peeled it open, it was early in the morning, the apartment still dark except for the dull glow of the refrigerator light and the soft hum of the city waking up beyond the window. I unfolded the paper carefully, like it might tear under the weight of its own words. The handwriting was familiar, rounded and tidy, the kind of penmanship taught in Catholic school cursive books, the kind you don't see much anymore. The first line read, "We've been thinking about you every day." The rest followed in a tone that was warm, almost lyrical, dipping in and out of fond memories, soft little recollections about camping trips and birthday cakes, and the time I got a trophy for spelling catastrophe in 2nd grade. It felt more like a scrapbook than a letter. The kind of narrative you write when you want someone to remember the good and not the gaps between. They told me they were proud of the man I'd become. They said they missed me. They said they wished things were different, that they were trying to understand, and they hoped the wedding would be beautiful, even if they weren't there to see it. What the letter never said, not once, was sorry. Not in the abstract, not in the specific, not even hidden between lines like some people do when they're trying to apologize without admitting guilt. There was no mention of the hospital bills, no acknowledgement of the birthdays missed or the phone calls not returned. No reference to the weight I carried when my legs were too weak to walk and no one offered to help. No confession about the way they stood behind Josh while I begged strangers for help paying for medicine. Just this line, near the end, written in softer ink as though it had been added later: "We love you, even if we don't always understand you." I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly, tucked it back in the envelope, and placed it in the back of a drawer I rarely opened. I didn't know what that act meant, not yet. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't final either. It was a placeholder. A pause button. A maybe. Some things hurt too long to be undone by gentle sentences written on fancy stationery. The wedding came quicker than expected, the days folding into each other like soft laundry. Maya was radiant, which sounds cliché until you're standing across from someone who truly makes the world fall away with one glance. The venue was small, just how we'd wanted: an old barn-turned event space, strung with warm lights and decorated with wildflowers that smelled like a field after rain. Her dad walked her down the aisle, beaming like a lighthouse. Her mom wept quietly in the 2nd row. I stood at the altar, hands trembling only slightly, heart too full for fear. And there it was, near the back of the rows, 2 white wooden chairs we had reserved, not labeled, not named, not even acknowledged out loud. Just 2 empty chairs under soft sunlight, waiting for people who wouldn't come. Josh texted me the night before. It came through at 11:49 p.m., just as I was brushing my teeth and running through my vows one last time in my head. The screen lit up with his name, followed by a simple message, "Still think you're making a mistake." I stared at it for a long time, toothbrush in hand, heart knocking against my ribs, not because I didn't expect it, but because I knew exactly what he meant. He wasn't talking about Maya. He wasn't talking about the wedding. He was talking about them, about blood and bonds and the fragile myths we build around the people who raise us. I didn't respond. During the reception, after the speeches and the clinking glasses, and the polite laughter of people half full of champagne and joy, I stood to give a toast. Maya squeezed my hand under the table, and I kissed her forehead before walking up to the mic. The barn had gone quiet, all eyes on me, waiting for a story or a joke or some poetic line to cap the evening. What I gave them instead was something else. Something I hadn't planned, not exactly. "Sometimes the people who raise you," I began, my voice steady and loud enough to carry, "don't actually see you. And sometimes, that's the last time you let that happen." I paused then, long enough to let the words settle, long enough to feel Maya's eyes on me, warm and proud and knowing. I lifted my glass, not toward the sky, not toward the empty chairs, but toward the faces of people who showed up. Friends. Chosen family. Real family. To the ones who see us, I said, "May we never mistake absence for love again." The crowd clapped. Some people smiled with their whole faces. Others nodded in that quiet way people do when they recognize a truth they haven't quite put into words yet. I sat back down, heart pounding, not with nerves, but with something like peace. That night, when the music had faded and the flowers had begun to wilt and the lights had dimmed one by one, I sat in our bedroom with the letter in my lap again. I opened it once more, curious if it read differently now that I'd said what I needed to say out loud. At the bottom of the final page, beneath the familiar closing line, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, written faintly in pencil, a line I must have missed in my first reading. It wasn't poetic or dramatic. Just this: "You'll always be our son. Even if you hate us now." I stared at that sentence, feeling a cold ache settle under my ribs, the kind of ache that doesn't sting but lingers. My hand hovered over the phone for a moment, thumb resting just above their contact. I didn't delete the message, but I didn't reply either.